Tonight's State of the Union address will be President Trump's first since he returned to the White House a year ago. He is due to outline his administration's accomplishments and policy agenda, and he's likely to get a cold response from Democrats. Democratic Senator Elissa Slotkin of Michigan joins us now. Senator, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You know, the president is expected to tout the administration's record on the economy, and it is true that inflation is cooling. The stock market hit its highest level. How do you see the state of the economy?
I mean, look, State of the Union is a perfect time to reset and just take stock. And a year ago, the president came in on the heels of running on lowering costs on big things. And a year later, even if inflation has cooled a little, the average person understands they're paying more for food, more for health care, more for housing, and more for energy, like the big four corners of the kitchen table. Those are the things he ran on. Those are the things he hasn't attacked. And then meanwhile, he's literally declared an emergency, a dozen times on things like Canada or Brazil, but he hasn't declared a housing emergency or things that actually affect the average American. And then in the meantime has spent a lot of time making money for himself. So, a year later, objectively, if he can wave his hands and try to make you believe what he wants you to believe, the American people aren't stupid. They know that they are spending more this year than they did last year.
So what's the Democrats' plan?
Well, look, I think the Democrats are in the wilderness right now. We don't have the House, the Senate, or the White House. And this is part of it. Like, you can criticize Donald Trump and you can go after him. But until we have our own affirmative, economic war plan, then I understand why people are saying, well, what would you do? For me, declare an emergency. The president has been bold on those things, but do it on the things that people care about. Declare a housing emergency. Make it so that the average person doesn't have to be 42 years old before they can buy a house. There are things that he can do with executive power that he has just not done because he doesn't want to offend kind of the big players in this field. So focus that same bold energy on things that actually affect costs.
Senator, I also want to ask you about Iran. You served as a CIA analyst in the Middle East. There are reports this morning that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is telling the president that there is a high risk of American casualties if the U.S. strikes Iran. I know you're also a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. What do you know about the possible timing of a strike? Do you expect a briefing anytime soon?
Yeah, well, we certainly have heard that Secretary Rubio is briefing the Gang of Eight, I think, as early as today, which is an important sign. I was just in the Middle East last week, and there's definitely movement of a ton of military assets into the theater, a lot of jittery people. I think the most important thing is, what exactly are we trying to do in Iran? What's the strategic objective, and how are we going to achieve it? Because it's true, if we go and take out the leader of another country, as much as that leader has frustrated many of us for our entire lives, what's the goal for the United States? How do we keep our people safe? And how do we know we're not going to be sucked into yet another, forever war? So the average person I know, including myself, who does national security stuff, can't articulate the goals of President Trump in attacking Iran. What is your goal? And then how are you going to make sure you can achieve it without boots on the ground?
Well, the president says that this conflict could be easily won, in his words.
Great. Nothing stronger than the U.S. military. I understand that. But if you go after the head of this country, right, the Iranians have ballistic missiles. They have terrorist agents all over the Middle East and beyond. You just should understand and be able to articulate how you're going to keep our troops safe in the Middle East. Again, lots of military assets being brought into theater. But what's the goal? Just decapitation? Or are we going to go in if something falls apart? That's what I think we're wondering.
The president will speak tonight. The Democrats get a response. And tonight it's Governor Abigail Spanberger of Virginia. You did the Democratic response last time. What advice do you have for the governor?
Yeah, well, we've been in touch. She's a good friend of mine. I think it's a great person to have given the response. Look, just be straight with the American people. Tell them to keep book on Donald Trump. He's doing plenty to make their lives harder. Flag that, and don't let him get away with what we know will be a lot of hand waving and distraction, trying to feed the American people something that just isn't true. So highlight what he hasn't done and what we are going to do instead.
Senator Elissa Slotkin, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
CBS News will have live coverage tonight of President Trump's State of the Union address and the Democrats' response. CBS Evening News anchor Tony DeCopel will lead our coverage starting at 9 p.m. Eastern here on CBS and streaming on Paramount+. Then you can watch the Free Press post State of the Union wrap-up on our streaming channel, CBS News 24/7.